Hello, and you're welcome to the Miami Showband Peace Centre online. And we continue our series of Speaking for Myself. The theme of today's event is friendship, music, and loss. And our two witnesses today who will speak about the loss that they felt and continue to feel all of these years with the loss of their friends. There's Danny O'Keefe and also George Jones. And we've got our panellists who will give us their views on what they've just heard, and that's Father Brian D'Arcy and Stuart Bailie. So without further ado, George Jones, can I ask you to tell us about the great loss of your friend, Wesley Black?
You can indeed, Stephen. I'll give you a brief history of who Wesley was, first of all, because joining us today as well as a lad called Roy Kane. He and myself and Wesley and a chap called Bill McAllen all went to school together. We came from the east part of Belfast, Bloomfield, and at a later stage, we started as a skiffle group, obviously, together and going to school together. And then Van Morrison joined us and became a sort of a rock band, pre-show band thing. Wesley was a quiet lad. He was only himself and a sister. With their mother and father, and lived in East Belfast. But he was an extremely talented keyboard player. Now, in my mind, when I say extremely talented, he emulated the great piano players of the pop scene of the day. That is, people like Floyd Kramer, Jerry Lee Lewis especially, and Little Richard. He was a rock and roll pianist. And we went through the usual thing, looking for dates, rehearsing, blah, blah, blah. We eventually decided to head off to Scotland, where we starved, and then we moved to London, where we starved for about 2 weeks until we were discovered. We headed off to Germany, and this is a band called the Monarchs, which, as you probably all know, is in Van's autobiographies and stuff like that. We had a hit record in Germany in 1963, but then we decided to come home. And 63, we all split, went our separate ways. I went in the way of show bands. Van went in the way, well, history knows about that. And Wesley seemed to disappear, really. He joined a couple of bands. As a matter of fact, I think he worked with Roy, who's our guest here too as well, in what they called the cabaret clubs. The big cabaret scene was happening just around about 68, 69, just on the verge of the trouble starting. I really hadn't seen much of Wesley. I bumped into him a couple of times. He seemed to bounce from one band to another. He was quite a lonely chap and quiet, and he didn't really excel much in various bands, but he always managed to keep working. Now, the day that the tragedy happened was something that you wouldn't write about in a sort of Stephen King book. The whole thing was so uncanny because Wesley hadn't seen his sister for a long time, from what we heard. And Eunice was still living in East Belfast on her own because their mother and father had passed away. And suddenly she got this call from Wesley to ask, was she all right? Was everything okay with her health, with insurance, etc.? And she said, Wesley, I haven't heard from you. Why are you ringing me? He says, I just got this feeling that I needed to ring you and find out if you're okay. Well, she assured him, of course, that she was okay. And the next day, he asked his estranged wife permission to go and pick their young daughter up after school, if it would be all right, to go let him walk her home just to see her. And Karen, of course, said, certainly, Wesley, that's no problem. And she took the young daughter home. He took the young daughter home and left her home. And he said to Karen something very strange. He says, something like, have a good life, but goodbye. And it's, you know, it was nice to see you. And Karen told us all this later. It was very strange. What he did that next moment was he called in a fish and chip shop on the West Circular Road in Belfast. And he was walking along eating this fish supper. And there was these two terrorists, gunmen, had been in a house assassinating another guy. And they ran out over the garden, jumped over the hedge and bumped into Wesley and knocked his fish supper out of his hands. And apparently Wesley more or less grabbed him and said, here, what are you doing? Stop. And the guy shot him. Wesley went down, face down on the ground. Of course, they ran away and the crowd went round them. And this Ulster Defence Regiment gentleman came out and he says, what's going on here? What's going on? And of course, turned him over. And the minute he turned him over, he bled to death before the ambulance got there. And that's the story of Wesley. It's so uncanny that an innocent guy like that was saying more or less goodbye to his estranged wife and his daughter, and had checked up on his sister the night before, and he lost his life the next day.
There is a special bond between musicians. It's like a brotherhood, and especially when you start off like you did, all you guys did, you were young and very enthusiastic, and hoping that you were going to knock the Beatles off the top spot on the.
Of course.
But how does that affect you for the rest of your life?
Well, the hardest part on the shock of hearing it, because we were all shocked, and mind you, we had only seen Wesley occasionally. But we got together, and at the funeral, it was so sad because there was only Eunice, his sister, Roy, and Billy, and I. I think Roy will keep me right, but I think we helped carry the coffin. And hardly any people there. And for us, it was like a brother who was taken away for us for no reason whatsoever. All the guy wanted to ever do was play music. And we toast him every year when we meet up, the Monarchs, Van and Roy and Billy and myself, and we have a toast to Wesley every year. But that was the first time that I've really been affected by losing somebody so close in the music world. And you sit down and you start asking yourself questions. Why does this happen? As you probably have done, Stephen, many times to yourself. Why does this happen to a chap that all he ever did was bring happiness to people through his music?
You lost Wesley, your keyboard player, but you almost lost the entire band at one stage.
I had joined a very, very popular band. Belfast city centre, what we sort of perceived was that the terrorists were trying to bomb the heart out of Belfast city centre. They didn't like people sitting together, maybe of different religions, and being friends. So the idea that we thought was that they were going to bomb the heart out of it. And there was 13 cabaret clubs, all very successful, 6 nights a week. And we were the resident band in the Abercorn. And a couple of clubs had already been attacked and blown up. So subsequently, the owner of the Abercorn had the security of closing down all the entrances except one, that you had to go upstairs into the foyer and be searched by the 2 doormen. Your bags were searched, etc., etc. And we had a 6 night a week residency plus a Saturday afternoon. And the Saturday afternoon was the most popular time for nearly all lads went out and had a few drinks, and it was always packed. There had been a few bombs gone off, but not with any major sort of death toll on them. And of course, we thought, we're musicians, it's a cabaret place, it'll never be touched. These are innocent people, they're just out to enjoy themselves. And there was a chap on, and he stayed with me for the week. He was top of the bill, a guy called Max Beasley. His son actually used to play a big part in Hotel Babylon, the television series. But he was an impressionist. And he had spent the whole week being totally nervous coming from England. And I said, look, relax, it's fine. There'll be no problem whatsoever. And we got the Friday night, and by this time he was so relaxed. The crowds loved him. And he walked out on the Saturday afternoon, and he got about 5 minutes into his act. And this bomb went off. And the whole building shook. Things went into slow motion. Waiters were flying in slow motion across the air. It was like total surreal matter of seconds, minutes, if you will. And then suddenly, bang, the sound came back. And the ambulances were outside, and the alarms were going off, and people were screaming. Now, we knew it had been a bomb. I had walked out, tried to get out to the foyer after we got most of the people out. And don't forget, Steve, there was 250 people upstairs, packed, right? The doorman we were talking to afterwards reckoned it was a man and a woman had tried to walk in with a bag, and they refused to have their bag searched. So he says, I'm sorry, sir, I can't let you in. And he watched them walk out, and more or less turn into the restaurant underneath, where obviously the bomb was, in a very confined space. I got out to the foyer, which was blown apart. There was only the joists there. And I stood on the joist in the public phone, because in those days they used to interrupt television programs, local television programs, to say the bomb has gone off, the key holders return, etc., etc. And I didn't want my wife to see that it had been the Abercorn. So I was literally looking down through the joists and the rafters at the bodies below, and I just couldn't perceive what I was saying. And I was in tears, and I was trying to tell my wife that it was all right. Now, afterwards, we found out how much of a tragedy that would have been. It would have been the greatest tragedy of all the troubles. But we were told by the bomb guys that bomb was only rated about £4.5. If that bomb had been £2 more, what saved the Abercorn upstairs was the 5-year-old Guinness trodden carpet, which had been turned into leather over the years, took the impact and held the floor together. If it had been £2 more, those whole 250 people would have come down, without a doubt.
My
And that to me, I live with that every year of what that would have been as a statistic in the Troubles. You can imagine 250 people falling down, possibly to their death.
Right.
Now, I know there was a tragic loss of life. There was a couple of people lost their life, and lovely girls planning a wedding lost their limbs and everything. But to me, that will live with me for the rest of my life. And there was a place filled with innocent people being entertained by musicians that was targeted for what reason? I don't know.
Well, we had one of the survivors of the Abercorn bomb with us on a recent TaRP event online. Jennifer McNairn, and she lost both her legs, and her sister lost both her legs, an arm, and the sight of one eye. So I love the idea, George, that we're finally getting to talk about Wesley Black, because that man, like so many other musicians, I suppose, and we'll hear about another musician in a few minutes, but you know, who knows what kind of a career he would have gone on to have.
I honestly believe he probably would have finished up with Van, being very successful, because Van loved him as a piano player. We were a band of brothers because we came up through school.
Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about here now with our friend Danny O'Keefe. Danny, would you tell us about your great friend Tony Garrity?
Yeah, sure. Myself and Tony were childhood friends. You know, we grew up together, and we both went to different schools, but we always played together in the evenings and weekends and stuff. And we first got into music around 1965. We were 15, and we seen this guy walking down the road with a bass drum, and we went over and asked him, was he in a band? And it turns out it was Brian Downey. And we just literally said from that, you know, we should start a band, and because we're always listening to music and stuff. So Tony then started guitar lessons, and I started drum lessons, and there was about 5 of us supposed to be starting this band, and it ended up myself and Tony were the only 2 that stuck with it. So we got into this local band a couple of months later when we kind of got a few chords and beats together, and from there we just took off bit by bit. It ended up, you know, after about a year, we were playing supporting Alan Lee and the Chessmen. In those days, the show bands did 5-hour stints. So what they used to do was try and get a relief band to do 2 hours, so they'd only have to do 3. So we got that gig with them playing 2 hours before them, and that was our first real kind of gig, you know, that we had to actually play for 2 hours. But we were listening, we were playing stuff like the Beatles, the Kinks, the Stones, you know, all the kind of hits of the day, and we had to rehearse a lot to try and get them all together and stuff. So from that then, myself and Tony went out one night to see a band, Alex Clark's blues band, down on Thomas Street, the East of Eden Club on Thomas Street. And this was amazing to see, just 4 guys on stage playing fantastic music, real up close and loud with their large amps and stuff. So we decided then that we wanted to play that type of stuff, you know, we wanted to play blues and rock type stuff. So we started a group, our first group, and from that then, one kind of group led to another. But we were always playing together, working together, putting things together. Tony was a real dedicated kind of guy. He really threw himself into his instrument, and you know, I remember he used to show me his fingers where they had grooves in them from the strings on the guitar. He kind of practiced so much, but he really took off in leaps and bounds when we started playing, you know, Hendrix and Cream, you know, that type of music. And so much so that one particular gig we supported Rory Gallagher in in the Cave out in the Sportsman's Inn in Mount Miriam. And, you know, it was Taste fans we were playing to. Downstairs was the kind of rock gig, the Cave it was called, and upstairs was the pop kind of gig. And after the gig, Rory came into our dressing room, and he was talking to Tony. Thought he was a fantastic player, and he actually gave him his AC 30-watt amp, that he had. And as well as playing around the rock scene in Dublin then with guys like Garrity and that, Garrity used to come to our gigs, to see Tony play. And our first kind of show band gig really was, we went off the group scene into a band called the Gentry, Carl Geraghty and the Gentry. And that was the first time we were actually given a wage to play music. And Colette Wilkinson, Colum's sister, was in the band. And we used to play rock. We used to do Showband Massacre. It was actually a rock band. And we used to play Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, that kind of stuff. And that was actually our last band together. From that then, when we actually left that band, Tony got the gig with the Miami, and I actually went with Sandy Jones looking for the drummer at the time. But up to that, we always played together, and it was more of a friends thing. Because I remember, like a couple of months before we joined the Gentry, Tony was actually off the gig with the Granny's Intentions, which were a really big band at the time, writing their own stuff and recording, But he wanted to stay in our kind of scene, because we were playing great music and we were earning some money as well. It was kind of the best of both worlds. When the actual Miami murders happened, it was I was actually playing in Galway with Sandy Jones, and my brother came down from upstairs. We used to share a house together, and said, something's after happening to the Miami, and I think some of them are really badly hurt. So we drove down to Tony's house, and it was just devastating to go in and see the family and to find out what actually had happened. I just couldn't believe it. It was absolutely stunning, really stunning. But 45 years later, it still affects me. Because he was such a great guy and close friend. It's just it's hard to understand why people do these things, and why it actually happened to something like a band. You can understand other kind of military type stuff, but a band gigging around, and the people up north used to love us coming up to play. They really appreciated coming up to play. And the gigs were great. We were always really well looked after. We never had a hassle. Going through the border was a hassle. You had to turn off your lights and drive through this chicane situation. And, they'd come up and shine torches in your face and ask you what's your business. And sometimes then on the way back, they might take you out and check the van and that, There was no really hassle on the gigs, you just went up and played the gig, and the people really appreciated coming up and being there, and it was just a job. And but then when the Miami Massacre happened, no bands would go up. The bands I was with didn't really want to go back up north because they didn't know. There was no sense to it. You didn't know what was going to happen next. You couldn't fathom it. But then little by little, it kind of came back. And then the more we gigged up north after that, the people really, really appreciated it. And but like it was an absolutely stunning situation for me to lose my best friend like that. It was stunning, incredible.
Thanks for telling us that. Where it's particularly difficult for any of us to hear that, and I'm sure it must be very, very difficult for Tony's brother, who's with us here. We're very honoured to have Carl Geraghty with us now. Brian, you've listened to the testimonies of the witnesses there, and the loss of friends. You've been the unofficial chaplain to the music industry.
It's just very moving to listen to both George and Danny, and thank you both for being so honest about it, because I know myself, when you begin to talk about trauma in your life, it brings the trauma back no matter how often you talk about it, and different aspects of the trauma come to your mind. The whole point about trauma is that it never leaves you the same as you were before it. That you can be better or you can be worse, but you're not the same. It changes. It's a life-changing event, and no matter how it's trauma. And I know that personally myself, dealing with it. And that's not to say that the same trauma affects everybody in the same way. Of course it doesn't, you know. And so when you say about what violence does to people and what all of this does to people, there's no measure of it, because you have the figures of how many died. But you don't have the figures how many died inside. And that's an incredibly difficult thing, because you know, families are never the same, life are never the same, you can never trust anybody the same. I don't think, and I say this now as somebody who's lived north and south for all of my life and been involved in every sort of ministry imaginable all my life, in both north and south, but I don't, first of all, I think in the Republic of Ireland, they have no idea what happened in the north. Some do, but mostly they don't. And because of the nature of life is, most just, I was working in the south at that time, and they always used to say, see, these are all the same up there, one is as bad as another, which it used to drive me insane, because we're not all the same, and not everybody agreed with anything that was happening in any of that. And we're not one is as bad as another. You see, it's one of the things that a whole nation at that stage was actually tarred with the very same brush. Now, what it does to people, see, what we do with things is we put tags on people, we put names on people, because if we thought of them as people, we would never be able to have that insight or that cruelty within us to kill them. But if you call them an enemy, put some name on them that you can justify your enmity to them, then anything is possible. And it's happening to this day with various groups, and Black Lives Matter, etc., is a great example of that as well. So we have to have a cultural difference and a new way of thinking, because otherwise, each of us becomes contaminated. And until we talk about it and become aware about it, that contamination takes over each of us. And the advantage of us talking here tonight is very important, because now we're saying, we're bringing to the core, I have to ask myself, in what way have I been contaminated by the loss of so many friends, by the loss of how much we have George and Danny been contaminated, even more, how is Carl, how is his father Peter, his lovely mother, and all of those people, how were they affected? Did they ever have a life again? They didn't really have a life that they could have had. And so you don't just murder one person, you murder a family and a neighborhood, because that's what we do with people. And this must be named, it must be named, because all of us in our own deep psyche and soul have been contaminated by it, and we need to be aware of it, because it affects our thinking and affects our judgment if we don't.
I think the greatest example of when Northern Ireland itself suddenly realized and came together as an opposition, a human life opposition to what was going on. The greatest example for me was the Omagh bomb. And I was working on radio. I was out with a television series, which you remember, Brian, was called Town Challenge.
Man,
and the whole object of that was to bring villages together in competition. Be they a Protestant village or a Catholic village. It was great work. It went on for years and it was wonderful. And I remember being with Hugo Duncan and myself, with 1,000 people in our class, with 2 towns, neighbouring towns, competing, fun, 1,000 people outside, sunshine, and word came through on that Saturday about the bomb going off. And you could see the people disappearing, no matter what fun they had. It suddenly had hit them that not one person had died, but a whole town had died that day. And I said to myself, what am I going to do on Monday? How am I going to portray this on radio? Because I had a very light-hearted program. I said, how am I going to be somber? What am I going to do? And it was either God who helped me, which I believe now did, and he gave me the strength to go on and just open my heart and say I was sorry. I was apologizing, actually, to the people of Omagh for what had gone on. And from that day, Monday through to Friday, I threw it open and I said, listen, people out there, if you want to express yourself, please come on the programme. And my programme, as well as all the other programmes on Radio Ulster, became like a conduit of sympathy, where the whole sympathy was coming into our programme and we were relating it back out. I had lorry drivers crying and had written a bit of poetry on those particular days. And that, I had thought to myself, well, I didn't really know anybody who died, but I'm going to do my best for Omagh. And on the Wednesday, I decided to take a bunch of flowers down. And when I stopped at the car park with my wife and my sister, the minute I walked out, a lady ran across from the car park and she said to me, George, you're doing a wonderful job. I says, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to encompass the whole sympathy of the world, because we were getting calls from England and America and everywhere using the radio shows to portray their sympathy to the people of Omagh. And she says, but you are. And she says, you remember, I think it was Patricia. She said, you remember Patricia? And it suddenly hit me, who have I missed here that I didn't know? I thought I didn't know anybody. She says, poor Patricia is being married or being buried in a couple of days. And you know her? I says, how do I know her? She said, well, on the day before her wedding, you rang up with a surprise call for her. And I just broke down in tears. I still do. And suddenly it hit home to me that I had touched somebody and I had known somebody. And this brought our province together so much, albeit a terrible, sad tragedy. But that's, I think, when we united together against this terrible outrages that was going on with innocent people.
We actually left a legacy passed on to another generation of musicians who were affected by it. And Stuart Bailie, you have been involved in the next generation. How did the events like the murder of Wesley Black and Tony Garrity, how did that affect the music industry?
Well, I was born in 1961, so the events of 1975 that you're talking about, I was 13, 14 and kind of bewildered. And also, I can't really remember what things were like before the conflict. So my teenage years and my youth were really conditioned by growing up and living in the conflict and hearing bad news stories and not being able to socialize in town really, or not going able to see live music, which I have 3 daughters and they're out all the time, and a life without live music is, how did I not grieve for that? But there was so much else going on. But it took a long time then, I think it was the late 70s really, before musicians were confidently coming back into Northern Ireland. Rory Gallagher, bless him, played every year, once or twice. Thin Lizzy would turn up, Horse Lips. There were a few brave people who and Northern Ireland will always love those people. And we got back towards what people called an acceptable level of violence. But I think music carried us through a lot of bad times. And I wrote a book called Trouble Songs, and I've spoken to some of the people on this get together. And music and songs help the directors on the right way. It's Van Morrison's 75th birthday today. We wish him well. What a legend. And as we were getting closer to peace, the idea that they used Van Morrison's music days like this, and they had that quote from Coney Island, wouldn't it be great if it was like this all of the time? And the Northern Ireland office were bringing this to the people and going like, this is the musicians, this is what happens. And in 1998, Bono gets Trimble and Hume to shake hands on stage, and it helped to swing the referendum. So it's my belief that popular music saved Northern Ireland from itself. And I love music anyway, but the part that music has played over here has been so important. And I have no idea how George, lives with the knowledge of Abercorn and Wesley. You know, those are, you know, I think we've all endured terrible things during the conflict, but those are particularly brutal things, and you know, if music can help to kind of broker the peace and make sure things like that don't happen again, then that's going to be a great thing, really.
Quite right. I think music too is a healer, Stuart.
Yeah.
Not only were we doing music, but we were concocting comedy. The normal Ulster, the very famous Ulster humour got us through so many bad times. I know it's senseless to say that we laugh, but if people, I used to listen to the great comedian James Young, who brought both sides of our community together for so many years with his wonderful humour and his wonderful drama and acting and pathos. He said to me one time, he says, George, Northern Ireland, the day that we stop laughing is the day when Northern Ireland will die. And that, for some reason, the music and the humour got us through those days.
Wesley's other great friend, Roy Kane, Stuart mentioned the fact that music saved the North.
Well, I don't think we even knew what we were doing, but we were cross-community before the word was ever invented. You know, well, we had all started off and we just played. It was all about the music. We traveled over the border. We played north of the border. We played everywhere, and we never thought anything about it. And it was only around about 68 or so, whenever all this badness started, that we started to worry. And I myself, I was under an awful lot of pressure, job-wise as well as music-wise, because I was involved in the commercial tire business for half of my career, and then the other half of my career was in the oil business. And I could have found myself dead at any time, because I was moving through areas and, you know, into areas where I could be perceived as being this, that, or the other thing, and could end up dead. If somebody had got shot yesterday, I could be shot today. I had tankers delivering to people's houses, and if Mrs. Smith rang up and ordered a drop of oil for her house for the heating, you know, and my tanker went out, and that happened to be a policeman's house or something like that, and somebody was watching it. The next minute, I was being threatened, you know, and then whenever you take it back at night, I was running home, getting washed, going out to play in the band. And then you were going out, you were being stopped by the police, you were being stopped by the army, you were being stopped by some other organisation. And you never knew whether you were going to get home at night. And people talk about the mental stress of this, that, or the other thing, but what we went through as musicians, people, I don't think they ever appreciated what we went through, the stress that we went through, because we never knew where we were going to be. You know, even some of the places where we're playing, and as I say, you know, we were blowing up, or somebody was targeted, and, you know, and it could have been you know, whatever.
Carl, the devastation in your house, in your household, when Tony was killed, I mean, it must have changed life for all of your family. Brian touched on it there.
Yeah,
your brothers and especially your father and mother. I mean, there's the famous recording the scenes. It's actually in our Netflix documentary where Tony's burial. But it doesn't just stop, as our friend Alan McBride said. It doesn't stop when the cameras go away. It doesn't stop when the reporters go.
In 3 days, my mother went grey. 3 days, unbelievable. Brian D'Arcy was unbelievably kind at the time. I remember he used to go up every night and smoke a pipe with my dad. I was unbelievably, the anger was unbelievable. I never felt sorry for myself or anything like that, but the anger was unbelievable. Hatred was extraordinary. Danny O'Keefe and a guy called Robbie Walsh were very kind to me, probably when I was at my worst after that. And apart from that, the anger is still there, though. I don't think I've lost any hatred. I still have the hatred.
If I can just have a word with Turlough McConnell in New York. Turlough, stories like this, how important are they to inform the people that perhaps many of them would have a romantic view of the conflict?
Well, first of all, it's humbling to be here. It's just totally humbling. And it's, you know, I mean, one story is just richer and more profound and deeper and more human than the other. It's just colossal. These stories are colossal stories. And I was thinking before I came on the program, last night I was watching a very, very popular show in America. It's called 60 Minutes, and it's on CBS television. And it's probably the #1 news magazine style program in the country for 60 years. I used to work at CBS. So it's kind of like, it's the program. And last night they did a vignette, a segment of maybe half an hour segment on the show. And the title is what you're doing here. The title is, and I was sending you an email on this, Stephen, and you and Eugene will get it later after the show. I was sending you a link to the program so you watch it yourselves. But the title is Talking to the Past. And the show was about it was the Holocaust stories. It was about capturing the Holocaust stories while the survivors are still alive. Now, I don't mean to frighten you, but the age groups are going up, me included. I wasn't a musician, but I know all the music, and I was there at many of the dances. But the age group is going up, so the program is all about who is going to be telling these stories in the future. Well, the people that Steven Spielberg, and you and I, Stephen, have spoken about this before, Steven Spielberg funded the Shoah Foundation at the University of Southern California to collect stories. And now those people at the Shoah Foundation are beginning to, they've created this thing called hologram stories, where they film the storytellers, which are the gentlemen on this show who have experienced this. They film them in this sort of radical new artificial intelligence cameras so that those stories will live on and school children will be able to have a presentation of any of you in 50 years' time talking about the Troubles. And I'm very taken by what Father Brian said about, you know, the lack of respect for the tragedy of the North. That is the great crime of our time. And I speak as a Buncrana and a Sean dairyman, having lived in America for 50 years, that there's still not the respect for the pain that people went through. And that's what's coming across from your show and from your programs and from you collecting these, that the greatest thing is you are collecting these stories and you have to trust. And we're Irishmen, we must trust the story. It will live on, but it'll only live on by capturing it with technology like you're doing now. So that's my feeling on it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Turlough. Just watching Paul Finnegan. You're another generation, and I can't help feeling that, looking at the news today, that there are parallels between Ireland in 1969 and America today, that there are the same type of thing seems to be happening, the same danger seems to be looming. Do you think that America can learn anything from the lessons of the Irish conflict and the post-conflict attempts at resolution or reconciliation?
Certainly, absolutely. One of the things that the New York Irish Centre and the director is looking at is exploring the relationship of the Irish and the African Americans here, and you know, the racial injustice in the United States is they call it the original sin here, and it's gone on for centuries, and it rears its ugly head every now and then. But we're coming into a time where I think in this country that it has to be solved once and for all, and we feel there are forces on both, especially there are forces in retreat, shall we say, that are making it a very nasty episode. So we started to talk at the New York Irish Centre about, you know, what can we do to promote racial justice here in the United States. And one of my staff, who's a Belfast lady actually, talked about how the civil rights movement in Ireland in the 60s got its inspiration from the civil rights movement in the United States. And I think it's come full circle now, because, you know, people in the United States are largely insulated from violence, even though it's a society with a tremendous amount of guns. The vast majority of people in the United States do not know war, do not know conflict. We were able to go, the United States was able to go to war in Iraq and Afghanistan with a volunteer army. It affected a very small percentage of the population, such that they really didn't realize what war was all about. So with what's happening now, with the massive amount of economic and racial injustice in this country, it's getting closer. So there is a tremendous amount that the Americans can learn from Ireland, which was divided along religious sectarian grounds. Here it's divided both along, you know, color grounds and economic grounds. There's a tremendous amount that can be learned by the United States as to how bad it can actually get, that it's not all a harmless video game at the end of the day. So we're going to explore those teachings through the New York Irish Centre in the time ahead.
Thanks for that. This is a conversation that I'm sure could continue for a lot longer than the time allotted to us. It's been a privilege, I can say, and particularly difficult. I look forward to this music program. That's what I called it. It's not really music, is it? It's real life, and it's reality, and it's killing and murder and all of these things. But there was a musical center to it, and I look forward to it. It's been difficult because in one way I'm very sad that I never got to know Wesley Black. I never got to hear him playing. I'm sure he would have been one of the giants when I listened to George and to Roy, and in particular the fact that I was with Tony Garrity when he was murdered. So all I can say is thanks very much for being so forthright and honest and very generous. I want to thank Eugene Reavey as always. He's been there, and he didn't have to interrupt us once because he keeps us on our toes and makes sure that we don't wander off to talk about other things.
Give you a wide berth.
Thanks for that, Eugene.
Stephen,
yes.
Stephen, can I leave you with one line that I think sums it up from a musician's point of view? When things were rough, and even after Wesley's death, which I had, and myself and Roy had a certain amount of hatred about the people who took this young lad's life. But by playing in all, as Roy said, we played in all different parts of Northern Ireland, and we didn't ever ask. But we were always asked, irrespective of what we were doing to try to keep people happy. You got the question, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? And I used to turn around and say, I'm a musician.
It's the best religion. Thanks to everybody who helps us. If you get an opportunity, please visit our website, TaRP.ie. We want to thank all of the people who contribute and support us all along, and in particular the Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Thanks very much for that. And God bless you all.